The Quaternary period is part of a continuing ice age, during which intense periods of glaciation lasting nearly 100,000 years have been alternating with warmer interglacial 20,000 to 30,000 years long. Major change in mammal fauna occurred during the last glacial and interglacial periods, with the extinction of the Pleistocene megafauna. Our own species might have played a significant role in their demise. Earth's oceans and continents have been more influenced by climate during the Quaternary than in any other period. As the ice sheets advanced with a pincer movement from north and south, much of the water that otherwise would have returned to the oceans became locked in the frozen continents and the sea levels fell substantially. During this period, humans, who had previously lived as hunter-gatherers, began to domesticate animals and establish permanent farming settlements. Our influence on the landscape has increased and we have come to dominate the environments in which we live, at the expense of many other species. Yet the world geography we see today could be transient. Human activities seem to be causing global warming on a scale that threatens to flood of terrestrial areas. Its impact on the climate and whole ecosystems has been so extensive that some scientists have proposed a new epoch in Earth's history, the Anthropocene. However, this really short period could, in geology, only be seen by a drastic loss life in every ecosystems of the planet. The start of the Quaternary is now taken as 6 million years ago. Temperatures dropped gradually, and many large mammals became extinct during the coldest time, but in general terms the extinctions on land and in the sea were considerably less severe than at the end of the Cretaceous. In the oceans, the same kinds of animals prevailed as in the Neogene, although their distribution changed as the ice sheets advanced and retreated. The remains of both marine and land-living animals have been used to understand the climatic changes that took place, especially from cores drilled through Cenozoic and Quaternary marine sediments. Foraminiferids are sensitive indicators of climatic change, as successive cold and warm water groupings change through time. The foraminiferids themselves preserve a record of stable oxygen isotopes, which can be used to measure the temperatures that existed when these microfossils were alive. Cold water bivalves are different from those of warmer seas, and are used a similar way. Heterocyathus is a small tabular coral with flat base and top, and roughly rounded sides. The center of the coral has a series of slender, vertical pillars arranged opposite the ends of the dividing walls, which look like rings of small dots. Like all corals, it starts life as a planktonic larva. This eventually settles on the seabed, usually attaching itself to a small shell, which it soon outgrows. Modern forms sometimes live in symbiosis with sipunculid worms, and it is likely that fossil forms did too. Living species can be found at depths of 10 to 550 meters. Colonies of the bryozoan Hippoporidra encrusted the surface of gastropod shells in many thick layers, sometimes forming large spiral extensions. On the colony surface, many circular features can be seen. These are the openings to structures called autozooidia, which contained the soft-bodied feeding animals. The autozooids had a ring of tentacles surrounding the mouth, called a lophophore. When the zooid was not feeding, the lophophore could be withdrawn into the autozooidia for protection. The frontal walls of the autozooidia are perforated with pores. Raised areas can be observed on the colony surface, where the autozooidia are larger. Neptunea's shell has a tall spire, coiled so that each whorl overlaps the preceding one for about a third of its height. Fire spiral ribs are crossed by variably strong growth lines, which may represent seasonal variations in growth. It is essentially a marine scavenger, feeding on dead fish, crustaceans and mollusks. Limnaea is a genus of freshwater snail that includes the great pond snail, common across much of the northern hemisphere. The shells are pointed, with the whorls forming a long spire. Limnaea snails have flattened feelers and curtain-like edges to the foot. All freshwater snails and land snails are hermaphroditic. Individuals produce both eggs and sperm. Unlike marine gastropods, which have gills, they are breathe air and must surface to take it in. Murex is a highly ornamented marine gastropod, which survives by feeding on other mollusks, particularly bivalves. The long spines projecting from the murex shell help protect them from fish and other creatures that might prey on them. Those nearest the underside also help support the gastropod as it moves over mud or similarly soft substrate on the sea bottom. The large number of long spines on the shells of murex makes them hard to confuse with any other shell, fossil or otherwise. However, there are other distinguishing features. The opening of the shell is always over to the right when looked at from below, and the cover for the inhalant siphon, at the base of the opening, is greatly elongated, so much so that it is often longer than the rest of the shell. Trivia is a gastropod similar to the modern cowrie shell. Looked at from the outside, its spiral shape and invisible. A cross-section through the shell, however, shows it to be spiraled. As it grew, each whorl completely enveloped the preceding one, hiding it from view. Extending out from its long, narrow opening are slender ridges. In life, its shell is at least partly covered by fleshy lobes extending from the body underneath. It is a carnivore that feeds on sea quartz and other similarly immobile invertebrate animals. Vermetus is a most unusual gastropod that looks more like a worm tube. The first part of its shell is coiled as in most gastropods, but then the spiral opens out to form an irregular, twisted tube. The tubular shell has flattened sides, which in places are slightly concave. It also has quite thick walls bearing finely spaced growth plates and thicker ribs parallel to the direction of shell growth. It often lives in clusters of several individuals. Helix is a genus of land snail with many species, some living and other extinct. Each whorl of a helix shell overlaps the preceding one to about half of its height, giving a fairly high spire. There is usually a pronounced lip at the mouth of the shell in mature snails, absent in younger snails. Helix are hermaphrodites and their eggs develop into tiny adults without going through a larval stage. Land snails first appear in the fossil record in the Carboniferous, while freshwater snails do not appear until the Jurassic, suggesting that air-breathing gastropods were derived from marine ancestors, and freshwater forms from terrestrial snails that went back to the water. Carbicula is a small bivalve with a rounded triangular shape and a broad beak on each valve of its shell. Inside, each valve has clear scars where the abductor muscles attached, and the hinge line has prominent teeth. The central tooth below the beak of one valve fits in a central socket in the other. Outside the central teeth, there are lateral teeth and sockets that run parallel to the edge of the shell. The elastic ligament that opened the valves sat outside, behind the beaks. Both valves of a pecten shell are ornamented with ribs that are flat and the spaces between them narrower than the ribs themselves. The hinge line of each valve is quite straight. Inside each valve, the most obvious feature is the very large adductor muscle scar. As one might expect for a bivalve that is able to swim by opening and closing its shell, the adductor muscle in live animal is large and powerful. Most people know members of the genus Pecten as scallops. Cerastoderma is best known as the cockle commonly found on modern European beaches, but its history goes back to the late Paleogene. In outline its shell is relatively square, with strongly radiating ribs crossed by raised riblets parallel to the direction of growth. The beak of each half of the shell is pointed and runs straight across the hinge line. There are 2 teeth on the underside of the beak in each valve. Inside the shell there are 2 clear muscle scars where the adductor muscles attached. In life, it lives in shallow burrows. The Venus includes both living and extinct bivalve species. Each shell has a beat that curves around to one side behind, which is a smooth depressed area. On the inside of each valve beneath the beak there are 3 large teeth and sockets. Each valve also has two scars on the inside that are roughly equal in size. There are the points where the adductor muscles which closed the valvus were attached. The living species are commonly known as Venus clam. These mollusks are filter feeders that live in burrows in the mud or sand of the seabed. Members of the genus Balanus are commonly known as barnacles. This type both fossilized and living as a roughly conical form. Barnacles tend to be irregular in shape, especially when crowded together as they often are. The walls of the shell are angled inward and are composed of 4 to 6 rigid plates cemented together. Throughout the Pleistocene epicus caps advanced and retreated around the globe, forcing vertebrates to move and adapt. Many species succumbed to extinction after the end of the last ice age about 10,000 years ago. Since then, modern humans had a dramatic impact on the world's fauna. Mammals abounded beyond the edges of the ice caps during the Pleistocene. Large animals were better able to conserve body heat and survive extreme cold than small animals. In addition, several northern species such as woolly mammoths and woolly rhinoceros sported thick fur coats that kept them warm. The ranges of many animals expanded and contracted according to the changing climate and vegetation. For example, reindeer moved southward from the Arctic to southern Europe during glacial periods, and, contrastingly, hippos moved northward from Africa to Central Europe during interglacial. Giant mammals were ubiquitous during the Pleistocene. Elephant-like mastodons and car-size armadillo-like glyptodonts lumbered around North America, while giant ground sloths inhabited South America. In Eurasia, there were giant rhinoceroses and giant deer. Australia was home to giant marsupials, including Diprotodon and Prosoptodon, the largest kangaroo to have ever lived. A combination of factors is likely to have contributed to the extinction of much of the prehistoric megafauna at the end of the last ice age. These included climate change, which caused many areas to dry out, and pressure imposed by the spread of modern humans, who hunted many of the species and also learned to use fire-clear vegetation and for cooking. Megalania was a heavily built, giant monitor lizard that resembled the Komodo dragon. It was so impressively large and powerful that it was able to eat any of the large Ice Age mammals of Australia. Its great size may have been due partly to the fact that there were few large mammalian predators in Australia. Only the much smaller marsupial lion, Thylacoleo, would have offered Megalania some competition. Megalania vanished about 40,000 years ago, at about the time that the first humans arrived in Australia, although there is no evidence that humans successfully hunted Megalania. It seems more likely that humans were the prey. Compared with modern crocodilians, Trilophosuchus had a short snout, very large eyes, and 3 long ridges of bone running along the top of its skull between the eyes. Its fossils have been found in Queensland, where fossil beds have revealed the beautifully preserved remains of the inhabitants of a thick forest. Excavations show a rich variety of mammals, which could have provided Trilophosuchus with ample prey. It was a member of the crocodilian family Megafauna, which first appeared in Australia in the Eocene. Members of this family were the dominant crocodilians in much of the southwest Pacific throughout most of the Cenozoic, until saltwater crocodiles arrived from Asia. The Megafauna vanished at the end of the Pleistocene, probably as a result of human hunting, or the destruction of their habitat or food source. A giant, flightless, ostrich-like animal, Apiornis was heavily built, weighing 400 kilograms, making it the heaviest bird that ever lived. It fed on a wide variety of fruits, nuts and seeds. It coexisted with humans for thousands of years, but became extinct soon after Europeans arrived in Madagascar. The reason for its extinction is unclear, but remains reveal that humans butchered Apiornis, so overhunting may be blamed. Dinornis was a moa, one of a group of giant flightless bird that lived in New Zealand from the early Pleistocene until they were wiped out by the Maori in the 16th century. It was the tallest bird that ever lived and, weighing 280 kilograms, it resembled a gigantic, heavily built emu. Despite the relatively small size of its head and bill, it would have been able to eat almost any type of fruit, seed or other plant food. It was covered in reddish-brown, hair-like feathers, except on its leathery feet and legs and much of its head and neck. There were at least 6 genera of moas living in New Zealand when human arrived. Their extinction was caused by human hunting, combined with habitat loss as the Maori slashed and burned the forests. This huge bird is known from the vast number of bones preserved at La Brea tar pits in California, but is also known from Pleistocene deposits in Nevada and Florida. It had stout legs and feet strong enough to hold down prey as it tore its food apart. Although Quaternary probably ate carrion, like vultures and condors, it also had features that suggest it was good at catching fish in the water. Large numbers of these birds may have been trapped in the tar pits at La Brea not only because they were attracted to carrion, but also because they may have tried to fish in the overlying film of water, or drink from the edge of the tar pools. It became extinct 10,000 years ago, perhaps due to the loss of carrion as many large American mammals vanished at the end of the last ice age. Fossils of this rhinoceros-like mammal have been found in late Pliocene and Pleistocene deposits in Argentina and elsewhere in South America. It was a member of an extinct group of South American mammals known as the notungulates. However, it was the size of a modern hippopotamus and looked remarkably like the rhinos of Eurasia and North America, making it a classic example of convergent evolution. Toxodon had a short proboscis, little like that a tapir, and an enormous skeleton with short, stumpy limbs that had tree toes on each foot. Its teeth were bow-shaped and suited to chewing a range of leafy vegetation. About 3.5 million years ago, the Panamanian land bridge connected North and South America, prompting the migration of many mammals between the two continents. Toxodon remained in South America and survived the arrival of northern mammals because no direct competitors made the journey. However, numerous remains embedded with arrowheads suggest that humans eventually hunted it to extinction. Castoroides was a giant Ice Age beaver. Its remains are known from rocks of the late Pliocene and Pleistocene in North America. Fossils have been found primarily around the Great Lakes and in the Midwest, but they have also been dug up in Alaska, Canada and Florida. Castoroides was the length of a modern bear and weighed up to 100 kilograms. Its tremendous size was not the only difference with modern beavers. It did not have their simple, chisel-like front teeth, or incisors. Instead, they were larger and broader, reaching to about 15 centimeters long. In addition, its tail was longer and narrower than the broad, flat appendage of modern beavers, and its hind limbs were shorter. Originating in South America, Glyptodon was a giant relative of the armadillo that migrated to southern North America when the Panamanian land bridge appeared. It was a well-protected animal, largely covered in skin-covered bones, known as osteoderms, which served as body armor. Even the tail was armored, being constructed of a series of tapering bony rings made of osteoderms. It vanished at the end of the last ice age, possibly due to human hunting, although no direct evidence of human attacks on the genus has ever been found. A giant ground sloth, Megatherium, weighed in at tons. It was about the size and weight of a bull elephant and was covered with long hair. It walked on the sides of its feet with its claws curled inward, and could prop itself up on its back legs' massive tail. Megatherium vanished at the end of the last ice age, when humans arrived in South America, although there is no direct evidence of Homo attacks. It had long forelimbs that were equipped with impressive claws, used for grasping branches and fighting predators. This giant bear had a huge body that was covered with long hair, and a relatively short skull with very powerful jaws that were capable of crushing its prey, bones and all. Although Arctodus was very large, it had relatively long, slender limbs for a bear, and may have been a fast runner, ambushing its prey with a quick dash from cover, or covering long distances to wear down its prey. It could also have been a scavenger and thief, easily able to drive other hunters away from their kills. It vanished at the end of the last ice age, possibly due to competition from humans, although it was so large and fierce that humans probably did not try to hunt it down. Canis dirus is a scientific name for the dire wolf, an extinct North American species. Its fossils have been found in rocks dating from the late Pleistocene. It was the size of a modern gray wolf, but was much heavier, weighing about 80 kilograms. It is though that dire wolves were scavengers, living like today's hyenas. At that time, there were no hyenas or other mammalian scavengers on the continent. Dire wolves died out at the end of the last ice age, probably because the first humans were spreading across the continent, wiping out the wolf's food source. Crocuta is the genus that includes the living spotted hyena, an African scavenger and hunter that is well adapted to running long distances in pursuit of prey. The Pleistocene subspecies, Crocuta spelea, known as the cave hyena, was considerably larger and more robust than its modern relative. It was apparently adapted for the colder climate along the edges of glaciers that covered Eurasia at that time, although it is thought to H. Avenue used cavus probably hunted and scavenged in open areas. First appearing in India at the beginning of the Pleistocene, it had spread east to China and also west to Europe and Africa by the Middle Pleistocene. Eventually most of its members died out, leaving only the lineages that still survive in Africa today. This well-known saber-toothed tiger was a large cat weighing about 400 kilograms. Despite its name, it was not a member of the tiger subfamily Pantherinae but belonged to the Machaerodontidae. Smilodon was very muscular and heavily built compared to other big cats. In some ways its body plan was more like that of a bear than a cat, with powerful forelimbs used for wrestling prey to the ground. It would probably have slashed its victim's throat or belly before retreating to leave it to die of blood loss. Finds of multiple Smilodon fossils suggest that this cat-like modern-day lions lived and hunted in large social groups. Like many other large mammals, it vanished at the end of the last ice age, possibly due to competition with humans. A highly successful and widespread genus of mammoths, Mammuthus, lived across the northern continents and Africa throughout the entire Pliocene and Pleistocene epochs. Species of Mammuthus include the famous woolly mammoth, which lived along the edges of the Ice Age glaciers, the giant imperial mammoth of milder regions, and a number of dwarf species which lived on islands such as the Channel Islands of California and Sardinia in Italy. Mammoth DNA from many examples of freeze-dried and mummified specimens found in the Siberian permafrost is almost identical to that of living Asian elephants. Indeed, mammoths were much like modern elephants in appearance, except that their tusks were considerably longer and curved inward. One theory attributes their extinction to infectious disease. However, mammoths were hunted by humans all over the world, and that along with the effects of climate changes probably contributed to their extinction. Mammoth is perhaps better known as the mastodontan extinct cousin of the elephants. It weighed up to 5 tons and had a long flat skull with slightly curved tusks. EAK time equals 0.2 s, greater than, and a back that sloped down from the hump over the shoulder. It was covered in long, shaggy hair and was well adapted to living in dense conifer forests. Preserved stomach contents show that it ate spruce and other low-fiber vegetation. It appears that mammoth did not vanish when human arrived in the Americas 10,000 years ago. Small populations survived until about 6,000 years ago in places like Utah and Michigan. Stegomastodon, a gomphothere mastodon, weighed over 6 tons. It had a shortened skull and jaw compared to other gomphotheres, similar to those of mammoths and elephants, with 2 long, incurved upper tusks that grew up to 3-5 meters long. Its huge molars had a series of cusps that looked like 3 leaf clovers when worn down. This form of tooth was well adapted for eating grass and other gritty vegetation. Stegomastodon originated on the grassy plains of North America. Several species crossed the Panamanian land bridge to South America, where Stegomastodon evolved into Cuvierinus. Equus is the genus that includes today's horses, zebras and donkeys. It first evolved from Dinohippus in the early Pliocene and still flourishes today in domestication, but most wild species of equus, especially asses, onagers and Przewalski horse, are rare. In North America, equus vanished with other large Pleistocene mammals about 10,000 years ago, possibly due to hunting by humans. Fossils from North America show a diverse range of species. For example, dwarf and giant forms, horses with robust legs, and others that were stilt-legged. The North American species appear to be related to African zebras and Eurasian asses, suggesting that horses once had a greater geographic spread. This Ice Age woolly rhinoceros was about the size of a large white rhino, and bore a thick coat of long, shaggy hair. It had a pair of horns that were oval in cross-section and curved backward, which it probably used to shift snow while foraging. Coelodonta's cheek teeth had the characteristic pie-shaped pattern of crests found in all rhinos, but were also highly ornate, with many additional ridges that increased the grinding surface. Many lines of evidence show that woolly rhinos were mostly grazers. Although they could probably eat almost any vegetation. It vanished about 10,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age, probably due to the retreat of its glacial habitat caused by climate changes. Having coexisted with humans for thousands of years, it is unlikely to have been hunted to extinction. Although it is known as the Irish elk, Megaloceros was not restricted to Ireland but was found across northern Europe and Asia. Nor was it a true elk. It is actually related to the fallow deer. It was one of the largest deer ever known, at least equal in stature to the modern moose. Its huge palmate antlers resembled those of the moose, but they were even larger. Megaloceros vanished at the end of the last ice age, possibly as a result of climate changes that destroyed its habitat. No complete Gigantopithecus skeletons or skulls have been found, and most of what we know about this creature comes from its teeth and jawbones. It was a huge ape that lived between 1 million and 30,000 years ago. It was built like a gorilla, but was far larger, weighing 540 kilograms. Scientists speculate that the Bigfoot and Yeti myths may have been based on Gigantopithecus. However, there is no evidence to suggest that these animals survived beyond about 300,000 years ago. Many thousands of years before humans lived in the area. Humans and apes are the living members of a primate superfamily, called the hominoids, that share a common ancestor. While all hominoids exhibit features that distinguish them from other primates, humans have evolved an array of characteristics that make our species unique. Anthropologists have discovered thousands of fossils of our extinct ancestors. There is now a fairly good picture of the general pattern of our evolution since the separation of the human lineage from that of the chimpanzees some 7 million years ago. Sahelanthropus lived around the time of the last common ancestor of humans and other apes. Some scientists believe that it was the ancestor of both humans and chimpanzees, but few agree. The fragmentary remains of Ororantuggenensis suggest that this species was closely related to the common ancestor of both humans and chimpanzees, and it may be the oldest known biped. The first member of the genus Ardipithecus is thought to be an early part of the hominin lineage, and would have looked much like a modern chimpanzee. Most believe Australopithecus gari only lived alongside our ancestors, while some believe we are its descendants. The other species Bar el Ghazali is poorly understood, and unusual among Australopithecines in that its fossils were found in Chad, not in the Rift Valley. Australopithecus africanus was the first hominin species to be identified. It was ape-like but bipedal, with a small brain and human-like teeth. Australopithecus afarensis is thought to be the ancestor of the genus Homo, to which modern humans belong. It is one of the best-known early hominids, with a number of significant finds, including Lucy, giving us a good idea of what the species looked like and how it behaved. Paranthropus ethiopicus lived at the same time as some of the early species of the genus Homo but seems to have been a side branch of the family tree that has left no descendants. The word Paranthropus means alongside humans. It has powerful chewing apparatus, large cheek teeth and thick tooth enamel of any hominin. Homo habilis was the first member of the genus Homo, to which modern humans belong. The species was named habilis, meaning handyman, because some of its fossils are associated with early stone tools. It is thought to be a direct ancestor of all later hominins. Homo ergaster, meaning workman, takes its name from its association with a stone tool culture that was more complex than any that had come before. Fossils of the species, such as the famous Turkana boy, look very different from those of their ape-like ancestors, being as tall as modern humans and with a similar build. It is probably the ancestor of all later species of Homo, including our own species. Although very different from modern humans, Homo erectus is much more modern-looking than its ancestors. While the origins of this species are unclear, it probably evolved in Africa. It is especially well known from Asia, and may have survived th. until about 50,000 years ago. Homo heidelbergensis was probably the last common ancestor of Neanderthals and modern humans. Fossils display a mixture of features inherited from earlier hominins, as well as more modern or evolved traits. The best known of all fossil hominins, the Neanderthals thrived in Europe for over 300,000 years before modern humans arrived. The question of their interaction has been the subject of much debate, not just among archaeologists but also in popular books and films. While the Neanderthals thrived in Europe, Homo sapiens was evolving in Africa. Although poorly preserved, fossils of these early humans display a mixture of primitive and modern traits, with modern human features gradually becoming better established. For years, archaeologists had not been able to agree whether Homo sapiens evolved recently in Africa, or much more slowly from hominids that had spread across Europe and Asia much earlier. However, skeletal evidence and the results of DNA analysis now indicate that modern humans evolved in Africa before populating every continent. The early modern human hunter-gatherers of Europe lived through some of the harshest environments created by the last ice age. Nevertheless, this was a time of rapid technological innovation and social change as well as artistic expression, as groups struggled to deal with the extreme conditions. More than 350 painted caves have been discovered in Europe, mainly in France and Spain but also in Italy and Russian Urals. Most seem to have been painted around 18,000 years ago, but some may date to Vert soon after modern humans arrived in Europe, 40,000 years ago. The Mesolithic, Middle Stone Age, was the period after the end of the Ice Age and before the spread of farming. Many radical and exciting developments in human societies occurred during this time.